everybody. Lobotomized Logan here, and this review is going to be about the Nintendo Switch 2, a month in. I spent about 70 hours with the system, so I can say I'm comfortable in reviewing it. I wanted to do like a week or 2 week update, but I just didn't spend enough time with it at that point, so 1 month review, here we go. And you read the title correctly. I cannot recommend this to everybody, at least at this point. In being a sequel system, it is inherently derivative of the original, so if you already have a Nintendo Switch, you don't really need this. But there are a few types of people who would benefit from buying a Switch 2. So I'll go over that in the review and later on when we round it all up. But this review is going to be split into two sections, hardware and software. When I speak about hardware, I mean the physical aspects, screen, anything that is the system itself, the dock, the Pro Controller, stuff like that. That is all hardware. So when I talk about software, I mean like what games are coming to the system or what kind of technological processes it can use and leveraging for developing that software. So software isn't just going to be video games, it's going to be talking about the development of games for the system and how I think it's going to hold up in the long run. Other than that, if you are on the fence and you want a Nintendo Switch 2, I'd say go for it. But with that being said, let's move our way into the review.
So first we're going to start with the pros of the hardware, and the hardware is amazing. It's very well built. It makes the Switch 1 feel like an outdated toy in comparison, like with how plasticky it is. Don't get me wrong, the Switch 2 still uses plastic, but it is much more premium feeling for $450 I would expect it to be. That also goes in the technical specifications of the hardware. The Joy-Cons feel so much better, and the technology packed in is a lot more in-depth. The screen is an 8-inch 120Hz HDR capable display. It is very, very nice looking and is going to come in super handy when we get a ton of like indie beat 'em ups that can take advantage of the 120Hz screen. The other advantage of it is with a 120Hz screen, especially one that supports variable refresh rate, is that higher end titles like Cyberpunk 2077 can actually take advantage of it with a 40 Hz mode, which means that it'll be smoother than 30 but not as smooth as 60. But 40 FPS, if you've never had a Steam Deck or a handheld PC, 40 FPS is pretty comparable to 60. And I would say most people's probably not going to notice the difference. The system also stays super cool. I've never really had it heat up on me a lot like that, other than when I was playing Cyberpunk 2077. And mainly that's because I went from docked to handheld, and I had already been playing for a couple hours at that point. But otherwise, the fans work really nice. It doesn't get too hot. The system's not too heavy. As with PC handhelds, that's a point of contention, as some of the ones like the Legion Go that do adopt a Switch-like tablet with removable controllers, they weigh anywhere between a pound to a pound and a half, and that really gatekeeps the amount of people who can play on it, because some people just don't have the ability to hold 2 pounds in their hands for extended play times. So that is understandable. The Switch 2, I would consider it to be a light system. Going into docked mode, it's kind of the same as the Switch 1. The dock has extra fans now, and it doesn't support VRR when docked, but that seems to be a firmware thing more than a hardware thing. As someone connected the Steam Deck to the Switch 2 dock and they were able to use 120Hz VRR on it, I think it's just because some TVs have conflicting issues with VRR support, so Nintendo wants to make sure it works 110% before rolling out. But with pros come cons. So here's the cons of the system's hardware. Now, while the screen, while looking nice and bright, allegedly has a super high refresh delay, which means that the image refreshes and it has a ghosting effect. I have personally never encountered it, or I've never seen like the motion blur, but I'm also not as susceptible to being annoyed by that, so your mileage may vary. Same thing with apparently the joysticks. They still can drift, but I haven't had the issue, so I'm hoping that it's more resilient, because it's something to keep an eye on, considering the fact a pair of Joy-Con 2s are $95 before tax. So for it to potentially have stick drift is crazy. And my last two issues are stuff that's more negligible. The first thing is I feel like it doesn't have enough storage. The 256 gigabytes you get, definitely not enough for upcoming games. You've got games like Split Fiction that are 70 gigabytes, games like Street Fighter 6, which are 60. At most, when it comes to these modern day ports, you're looking at maybe 5 or 6 Switch 2 games that are like big. Even more so if, say, Call of Duty Black Ops 7 ends up coming over or whatever the next one is. Warzone's probably going to take up the whole system storage. It'll probably be bundled with SD cards. And then my final complaint is just I feel like the battery isn't big enough. I get that you'd have to increase the price and the weight, but 20 watt hour battery, especially with how efficient this chip is, 2 hours of battery life isn't much. If they had even shoved a 30 watt hour battery into it, it would have been 3 to 6 hours instead of 2 to 4. But really, that's all the issues I have on the hardware side. It is a very well developed system, as they had the entire Switch 1 generation to reiterate and refine the design. So overall, if you just want a better Switch, the Switch 2 is a good purchase. But with hardware, we have to go into software. And this is the real crux of why I don't think you should buy a Switch 2 at the moment, is the software. But first, we'll go into the pros of the software. Software is the reason we all buy systems. Things like Donkey Kong Bonanza and Mario Kart World are system sellers for some, but not for others. And my main thing with the software on the Nintendo Switch 2, it feels like there's not enough coming out within the next year, especially from third parties. It feels like stuff that should be a shoo-in for the Switch because they've supported the Switch 1 before, and it obviously can run on the Switch 2, just aren't getting announced. Games that are like really simple, indie beat-em-ups, indie platformers getting Switch 1 versions, but not Switch 2 versions. Same thing with big franchises. It's like, so you'll drop this on the Switch 1, but you're not going to support the Switch 2, which is my main thing. Granted, we're only a month into launch, so I can get if they're holding off for a Nintendo Direct, but unless we get banger after banger at the Direct, it's kind of making me worry. Because there was a rumor that Nintendo didn't get dev kits out to most developers until after the launch of the system, which means that we're going to be waiting at least a year for some ports. But that is my main concern with the Switch 2, and that is why I would not recommend it if you have no reason to buy it. But we're going into the pros of the software. So, first pro is actually backwards compatibility. So, Fire Emblem Three Hopes, which is the game we're playing right here, runs phenomenally on the Switch 2. And the reason that's exciting is because this game used to have super heavy frame dips on the Switch 1. It targeted 60 at an unlocked frame rate, which is what I was talking about earlier, dynamic resolution scaling and uncapped frame rates. So, with it targeting 60 on the Switch 2, since it's using a translation layer, it can use the Switch 2's power as leverage. And it runs it silky smooth. And this is the case for a lot of different games, especially third-party ones with uncapped frame rates and dynamic resolution scaling. They'll run at their maximum potential on the Switch 2, which kind of gives it an unofficial Switch Pro vibe. But I couldn't recommend it just on the basis of backwards compatibility. So, talking about more software things other than just games that run better from the Switch 1 to the Switch 2, we're going to move on to future ports and what I think is going to happen with the Switch. And there is no better example to use than Cyberpunk 2077. This game is super hard to run, and it is also a day one port, which shows how powerful the system is, because with age comes optimization techniques and development skills. This is the first big port I can say that we've gotten, and it runs pretty well for what it is. Granted, you're not getting 60 frames per second, and it is using upscaling, but it looks phenomenal in docked. So as the system ages and gets more sales, I think that developers will be more likely to hop on to the train of supporting it, just because of how much the system's selling and how much easier it is to work on. Because if you wanted to port a big Xbox Series X game to Switch like Hogwarts Legacy, you basically had to remake the whole game. Like, if you look at the comparison of Hogwarts Legacy on Switch 1 versus even the Switch 2, leagues different. You had to go through loading screens on areas that would be seamless on other platforms. But we've kind of hit a brick wall when it comes to fidelity in gaming, which is going to bode very well for the Switch 2, in terms that games aren't advancing as much as they were. So a lot of cross-generation games are going to come out on the PS6 and the PS5, or even the PS4, 5, and 6, because there's still PS4 games coming out. And from what we've heard developers say, if it can run on the Series S at 60 FPS, then it can run on the Switch 2 at 30. Granted, the Switch 2 is much more CPU constrained than the Xbox Series S, which is why games like Cyberpunk has less crowd density and stuff like that. But it's gonna get a lot more ports than the original Switch did, just off the basis of being more of a technological powerhouse. And then for the final pro, We have a lot of games that are coming out within the first year. Not enough that I'd say, unless you have a specific game you want to run out and play, buy the Switch. But if you did buy a Switch for Donkey Kong, then there's probably at least one other game you want to play. Like, I bought it for the Dusk Bloods, but that's not coming out until 2026. But I'm excited for Donkey Kong. I'm excited for the new Hyrule Warriors. There's a lot of stuff on the system I'm excited for, and I have a decent backlog on the Switch 1. I've never played Tears of the Kingdom. I'm going through that for the first time now. Honestly, Breath of the Wild's better, but don't sue me. So I went through my only real big con, just there's not a lot of software that is coming out post 2026, and we don't really have a lot of franchises that are supposed to be on the Switch yet. Like, we don't have the next Smash Brothers announced, or even the next 3D Mario, which is why I am hesitant to recommend you buy it right now. I don't think it's going to stay up like that, but even if it does, we don't want a Wii U situation, which most likely not going to happen, guys. The Wii U failed so hard. The Switch 2, even if it sells half as well as the original Switch, is going to be a success. So, if you want to buy it right now, go ahead, but I'd wait unless there's a game you are itching to play. Another thing to keep in mind is also a lot of third-party games are going to come on game keycarts. So, going back to the storage issue, if you do want to buy physical games, you're not even safe from the storage then, as a lot of these games are coming on downloadable carts with no data on them. So that's also something to keep an eye out on. Completely forgot about this in my script though, but $80 games are a scam. Oh my god, that is another con. So we're going to go over some pros and cons just on these graphs, and if you're hesitant on buying it, I'd wait. It's not like there's any stock issues. My uncle actually sent me a photo of him at Target, and they had like 9 systems for sale. So there's definitely no stock issues, which Nintendo has successfully combated scalpers. So applause to them. That is about it. And now to the outro.
So I went over the pros and cons of the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, who do I think this system is for? I'd recommend it to 3 groups of people. First group is diehard Nintendo fans. If you're a diehard Nintendo fan, you probably already bought it, but if you're on the fence and you want to play like the new Mario Kart, the new Pokemon, everything at the highest fidelity and the highest frame rates, this is what you should buy. You should buy the Switch 2 because it'll run it better than the Switch 1, and you'll still have access to upcoming Nintendo games. Stuff like Age of Imprisonment, which is the new Hyrule Warriors, Dusk Bloods, new FromSoft game. If you're a diehard Nintendo fan, then I can easily recommend the Switch 2 as it's just more of the Switch, which is a good thing. The second group I can recommend this to is people with a massive library of Switch 1 games who are also interested in the Switch 2 exclusives. There's not much out on the Switch 2 at the moment and not much announced in way of third party, but if you have a massive backlog of Switch 1 games, then you are going to be set up with a good time. A lot of these games run at higher resolutions and higher frame rates due to automatic resolution and uncapped frame rate scaling. So games that ran between 30 to 40 FPS at 640p but could go up to 1080 are now most likely going to stick to that 1080 mark at 60 FPS. Not a lot of games are like that, but there are some instances. So second group, people with massive Switch libraries who want to take advantage of the power and play their games at higher frame rates and resolutions. Granted, you won't get the Switch 2 resolution or frame rates, that being 120 frames or 4K, because a lot of the Switch 1 games were programmed with 720p 60 in mind or 1080p 60, if they even targeted 60 frames or native resolution. And finally, the third group I can recommend the Nintendo Switch 2 to is people who do not own a Switch. If you want to jump into the Switch 2 and buy a bunch of the Switch 1 games, a lot of games do have frame rate and resolution updates, such as Mario Odyssey, Link to the Past. There are some paid ones like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but they run phenomenally. And if you don't own the games already, you can buy Switch 2 editions that will come on a cartridge and make them run better. So if you've never owned a Switch and you want to get into the Switch backlog while also playing new games, the Nintendo Switch 2 might be a good option for you. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the review, and I hope you guys are ready for more content, because I am really loving the Nintendo Switch 2. Hopefully we get a direct soon, because third parties haven't really been announcing games for it, which is concerning to say the least, as I just dropped $450 on the system, and I'd like to play some new games. But we're also only a month into launch, so you win some, you lose some. With all that being said, thank you for checking out today's video. Lobotomized Logan, out.